Well, from this it follows that free people produce for the sake of not consuming, that liberty means oppression and madness among the people, and that Mr. Lewis Blank absolutely must attend to it. Well, what liberty should the legislators permit people to have? Liberty of conscience? But if this were permitted, we would see the people taking this opportunity to become atheists. Then liberty of education? But parents would pay professors to teach their children immorality and falsehoods. Besides, if education were left to national liberty, it would cease to be national, and we would be teaching our children the ideas of the Turks or Hindus. Whereas, thanks to this legal despotism over education, our children now have the good fortune to be taught the noble ideas of the Romans. Then liberty of labor? But that would mean competition, which in turn leaves production unconsumed, ruins businessmen, and exterminates the people. Perhaps liberty of trade? But everyone knows, and the advocates of protective tariffs have proved over and over again, that freedom of trade ruins every person who engages in it, and that it is necessary to suppress freedom of trade in order to prosper. Possibly then, liberty of association. But according to socialist doctrine, true liberty and voluntary association are in contradiction to each other, and the purpose of the socialists is to suppress liberty of association precisely in order to force people to associate together in true liberty. Clearly then, the conscience of the Social Democrats cannot permit persons to have any liberty, because they believe that the nature of mankind tends always toward every kind of degradation and disaster. Thus, of course, the legislatures must make plans for the people in order to save them from themselves. This line of reasoning brings us to the challenging question: if people are as incapable, as immoral, and as ignorant as the politicians indicate, then why is the right of these same people to vote defended with such passionate insistence? The claims of these organizers of humanity raise another question which I have often asked them, and which, so far as I know, they have never answered. If the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad that it is not safe to permit people to be free, how is it that the tendencies of these organizers are always good? Do not the legislators and their appointed agents also belong to the human race? Or do they believe that they themselves are made of a finer clay than the rest of mankind? The organizers maintain that society, when left undirected, rushes headlong to its inevitable destruction because the instincts of the people are so perverse. The legislators claim to stop this suicidal course and to give it a saner direction. Apparently, then, the legislators and the organizers have received from heaven an intelligence and virtue that place them beyond and above mankind. If so, let them show their titles to this superiority. They would be the shepherds over us, their sheep? Certainly, such an arrangement presupposes that they are naturally superior to the rest of us. And certainly we are fully justified in demanding from the legislators and organizers proof of this natural superiority. Now, please understand that I do not dispute their right to invent social combinations, to advertise them, to advocate them, and to try them upon themselves at their own expense and risk. But I do dispute their right to impose these plans upon us by law, by force, and to compel us to pay for them with our taxes. I do not insist that the supporters of these various social schools of thought renounce their various ideas. I insist only that they renounce this one idea that they have in common. They need only to give up the idea of forcing us to acquiesce to their groups and series, their socialized projects, their free credit banks, their Greco-Roman concept of morality, and their commercial regulations. I ask only that we be permitted to decide upon these plans for ourselves, that we not be forced to accept them directly or indirectly if we find them to be contrary to our best interests or repugnant to our consciences. But these organizers desire access to the tax funds and to the power of the law in order to carry out their plans. In addition to being oppressive and unjust, this desire also implies the fatal supposition that the organizer is infallible and mankind is incompetent. But again, if persons are incompetent to judge for themselves, then why all this talk about universal suffrage? This contradiction in ideas is unfortunately but logically reflected in events in France. For example, Frenchmen have led all other nations in obtaining their rights, or more accurately, their political demands. Yet, this fact has in no respect prevented us from becoming the most governed, the most regulated, the most imposed upon, the most harnessed, and the most exploited people in Europe. France also leads all other nations as the one where revolutions are constantly to be anticipated. And under the circumstances, it is quite natural that this should be the case. This will remain the case so long as human beings with feelings continue to remain passive, so long as they consider themselves incapable of bettering their prosperity and happiness by their own intelligence and their own energy, so long as they expect everything from the law. In short, so long as they imagine that their relationship to the state is the same as that of the sheep to the shepherd. As long as these ideas prevail, it is clear that the responsibility of government is enormous. Good fortune and bad fortune, wealth and destruction, equality and inequality, virtue and vice, all then depend upon political administration. It is burdened with everything. It undertakes everything. It does everything. Therefore, it is responsible for everything. If we are fortunate, then government has a claim to our gratitude. But if we are unfortunate, then government must bear the blame. For are not our persons and property now at the disposal of government? Is not the law omnipotent? In creating a monopoly of education, the government must answer to the hopes of the fathers of families who have thus been deprived of their liberty. And if these hopes are shattered, whose fault is it? In regulating industry, the government has contracted to make it prosper. Otherwise, it is absurd to deprive industry of its liberty. And if industry now suffers, whose fault is it? In meddling with the balance of trade by playing with tariffs, the government thereby contracts to make trade prosper. And if this results in destruction instead of prosperity, whose fault is it? In giving the maritime industries protection in exchange for their liberty, the government undertakes to make them profitable, and if they become a burden to the taxpayers, whose fault is it? Thus, there is not a grievance in the nation for which the government does not voluntarily make itself responsible. Is it surprising, then, that every failure increases the threat of another revolution in France? And what remedy is proposed for this? To extend indefinitely the domain of the law, that is, the responsibility of government. But if the government undertakes to control and to raise wages and cannot do it, if the government undertakes to care for all who may be in want and cannot do it, if the government undertakes to support all unemployed workers and cannot do it, if the government undertakes to lend interest-free money to all borrowers and cannot do it, if in these words we regret to say, escaped from the pen of Mr. de Lamartine, quote, the state considers that its purpose is to enlighten, to develop, to enlarge, to strengthen, to spiritualize, and to sanctify the soul of the people, end quote. And if the government cannot do all of these things, what then? Is it not certain that after every government failure, which alas is more than probable, there will be an equally inevitable revolution? It is not true that the legislator has absolute power over our persons and property. The existence of persons and property preceded the existence of the legislator, and his function is only to guarantee their safety. It is not true that the function of law is to regulate our consciences, our ideas, our wills, our education, our opinions, our work, our trade, our talents, or our pleasures. The function of law is to protect the free exercise of these rights, and to prevent any person from interfering with the free exercise of these same rights by any other person. Since law necessarily requires the support of force, its lawful domain is only in the areas where the use of force